The room was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling. And Yoon Seo-yeon stood perfectly still with her hands behind her back as 5 senior officers stared at her from behind a long wooden table. She had expected this moment. But expecting something and living through it were 2 different things entirely, Cadet Yoon. The chairman said, his voice cold and flat. You have been found responsible for creating division among your fellow cadets and making false accusations against a respected member of this academy. Seo-yeon wanted to scream that she had told the truth. That she had seen Kang Min-jun with answers written on his palm during the tactical examination. That she had done exactly what the academy taught her to do when she witnessed wrongdoing. But she said nothing because she already knew how this would end. Min-chum's father was a National Assembly member, a man whose face appeared on television every week and whose donations had built the new training facility. And Seo-yeon was nobody, just a scholarship student whose mother cleaned office buildings at night. The chairman continued reading from his paper, listing her supposed violations: insubordination, filing a false report, damaging academy reputation, creating hostile environment among peers. Each word felt like a small knife. And she kept her eyes forward and her face empty, because she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. After careful consideration, the chairman announced, "This board has decided against expulsion." For one brief second, hope flickered in her chest. Instead, you will be reassigned to permanent night duty at the Records and Archives building, effective immediately. And you will remain there until further notice. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. The Records building was where the academy sent people they wanted to forget. A crumbling structure at the far edge of campus that housed decades of old files that nobody ever needed. And everyone knew that cadets assigned there never returned to regular training. It was not officially a punishment, but it was worse than expulsion in many ways, because at least expelled cadets could start over somewhere else. Seo-yeon was being buried alive. "Do you have anything to say, Cadet Yoon?" the chairman asked, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like amusement. She looked at him directly for the first time since entering the room, and she saw a man who had already forgotten her. A man who saw her as nothing more than a problem that had been solved. "No, sir," she said. And her voice did not shake, even though everything inside her was falling apart. They dismissed her. And she walked out of that room knowing that her life had just changed forever. That night, her roommate packed her things while Seo-yeon pretended to sleep. And by morning, the bed across from hers was empty and stripped bare in the dining hall. Her classmates looked through her like she was made of glass. And the few who accidentally made eye contact quickly turned away as if she carried some disease. They might catch Kang Min-jun walk past her with a smile on his face. And she heard him laughing with his friends about the scholarship girl who thought she could play hero. She ate her breakfast alone at a corner table and told herself that she had done the right thing. That telling the truth was never wrong, even when it destroyed everything. But believing that was harder than she expected. The Records building sat at the end of a gravel path that wound through overgrown trees. And when Seo-yeon arrived for her first night shift, she understood why they called it the graveyard. The structure was old and gray, with windows that had not been cleaned in years, and a front door that groaned like something dying when she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and forgotten things. And rows of metal shelves stretched back into darkness like the ribs of some enormous beast. A security guard named O was supposed to train her, but he spent exactly 15 minutes showing her where the light switches were before handing her a flashlight and a ring of keys. "Nobody comes here," he said, already putting on his coat to leave. "So your job is basically to exist and make sure the building does not burn down. And I will see you in the morning." Then he was gone. And as Seo-yeon was alone with a century of academy history, she walked the aisles that first night, reading labels on boxes and files, trying to understand the system that organized this place. And she found records going back to the Academy's founding disciplinary files. Graduation lists, incident reports, internal investigations. Most of it was boring. The kind of paperwork that accumulated naturally over decades. But something about being surrounded by all these forgotten stories made her feel less alone. These files represented thousands of lives. Thousands of cadets who had walked the same halls she walked, who had dreamed the same dreams she dreamed. And most of them had been forgotten just like she would be forgotten around midnight. She found a logbook from 15 years ago sitting open on a desk. As if someone had been reading it and simply walked away, she flipped through the pages out of curiosity. And one entry caught her eye. Case 1997-04. Transferred to restricted. Do not access. The notation was written in red ink, which was unusual. And there was no explanation of what the case contained, or why it had been restricted. Co Yeon searched the shelves for the file, following the numbering system she had learned. But the space where it should have been was empty. She might have dismissed it as a simple misplacement. But then she noticed something else in the margins of the logbook. Someone had written small numbers in pencil-page references, she realized, and when she followed them, she found more entries with the same red notation. Case 2001-12. Transferred to restricted. Do not access. Case 2004-7. Transferred to restricted. Do not access. Case 2008-15. Transferred to restricted. Do not access 7 cases total. Spanning 20 years, all marked the same way. All missing from the shelves. Saw Yu Yeon sat down at the dusty desk and stared at the logbook. And something cold settled in her stomach. This was not random. And this was not careless filing. Someone had deliberately removed these cases from the archive. And someone else had noticed and left a trail. She thought about the men who had sent her here. About the way they had smiled when they announced her punishment. And she wondered what else they had buried in this forgotten place. The building creaked around her, settling into the night, and Co Yeon made a decision. They had sent her here to disappear, to rot away in silence until she gave up and quit. But they had made a mistake. They had given her access to their secrets, and she was going to find every single one. The Academy banished her to night duty. That's where she found their secrets over the next 3 weeks. Seo Yeon lived 2 separate lives that never touched each other. During the day, she attended classes where instructors looked past her as if she were invisible, answered questions in a voice that nobody acknowledged, and ate meals at her corner table while conversations flowed around her like water around a stone at night. She became someone else entirely, a detective piecing together a puzzle that had been hidden for decades. The 7 missing cases haunted her, and she spent every shift searching for traces they had left behind. The files themselves were gone, but bureaucracy created paper trails that were nearly impossible to erase completely. And Seo Yeon found fragments scattered throughout the archive like breadcrumbsing out. Sheets showed that all 7 files had been accessed by the same person before they disappeared. Chief Instructor Baek Junho, who was now the deputy director of the entire Academy Medical. Referral forms mentioned psychological distress and recommended withdrawal for cadets whose names matched the missing case numbers counselor. Notes referenced incidents without ever describing what those incidents actually were, and buried in a box of old administrative records, Co Yeon found withdrawal paperwork for 7 female cadets who had all left the academy suddenly and quietly over a span of 20 years. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Young women entered the academy with dreams of becoming police officers. Something happened to them. Their complaints were buried in restricted files, and they vanished from official history. Baek Junho's name appeared in connection with every single case. Seo Yeon knew she needed more than paper trails. and she spent her few free hours tracking down the women whose names she had found. Most had disappeared completely, changed their identities, or moved away, or simply refused to be found. But one name led her to a security company in Basanmi. Mira had been a cadet 20 years ago, and now she worked night shifts guarding a warehouse near the dock. Seo Yeon took a bus to Bizen on her day off, rehearsing what she would say the entire way. But when she finally stood in front of Mira, all her prepared words disappeared. The woman was in her early 40s, with tired eyes and gray streaks in her hair, and she looked at Seoyeon's academy uniform with an expression that was difficult to read. "I have nothing to say to anyone from that place," Mara said, and she started to turn away. "Please," Seoyeon said quickly. "I found your file, or what was left of it, and I know something happened to you there, and I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Mira stopped but did not turn around, and for a long moment she stood perfectly still. "Why do you care?" she asked, and her voice was rough, like she had not spoken much in years. Yeon told her everything about reporting the cheater, about the punishment, about the night duty and the missing files and the pattern she had discovered. And as she spoke, she watched Mira's shoulders begin to shake. When Seo Yeon finished, Mira finally turned around, and there were tears running down her face. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "I thought I was alone this whole time." They sat on a bench behind the warehouse, hidden from the street, and Mira told Seo Yeon the story she had kept locked inside for 2 decades. She had been a third-year cadet, one of the best in her class. When Chief Instructor Beek called her to his office for what he said was a special evaluation, what happened in that office destroyed her life when she tried to report it. She was told that her accusations were unfounded, and that continuing to spread lies would result in criminal charges against her family. They gave her a choice: withdraw quietly and receive a small settlement, or fight and watch everything she loved be torn apart. She chose to disappear, and she had been hiding ever since he did this to others? Mira asked when she finished, and her voice cracked on the question. "At least 6 more that I have found," Seo Yeon said. "Maybe more." Mira covered her face with her hands and sobbed, and Seo Yeon sat beside her and waited because there was nothing else she could do when the tears finally stopped. Mira looked at Seo Yeon with something new in her eyes, something that looked almost like hope. "There was another girl," she said slowly, "a few years after me, and her name was Park Yoonbai, and she was braver than I was." Mira explained that Yoonbai had refused to stay silent, had gathered evidence and statements from other victims, had been preparing to go public with everything. "But then she died," Mira said, and her voice went flat. "A car accident on some rural road. 1 week before she was supposed to testify in a civil case she had filed." Seo Yeon felt ice spread through her chest. "You think it was not an accident?" she said. Mira laughed, but there was no humor in it. Her car went off a cliff on a road she had driven hundreds of times, on a clear night with no other vehicles around, and the investigation was closed in 3 days. She said, "What do you think?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card that looked like it had been carried for years. "Her brother still lives in Seoul," Mara said, handing the card to Seo Yeon. "He is a journalist now, and he has been trying to find the truth about what happened to his sister. But nobody will help him." She grabbed Seo Yeon's hand and squeezed it hard. "Yoonbai kept copies of everything," she said urgently. "Recordings and photographs and written statements from all of us. And she hid them somewhere safe before she died. But she never told anyone where." Seo Yeon looked at the business card in her hand. "Park Jun-seo, investigative reporter." "Find him," Mira said. "Find the evidence Yoonbai collected, and finish what she started." The bus ride back to the academy felt longer than the journey there. And Zio Yeon stared out the window at passing lights while her mind raced through everything she had learned. This was bigger than misconduct. Bigger than one powerful man abusing his position. This was a system designed to protect predators and destroy anyone who tried to expose them. A machine that had been running for decades and had possibly killed to keep its secrets. She should have been terrified. And part of her was, but another part felt something unexpected for the first time since her punishment began. Seo Yeon felt like her life had purpose again. They had tried to bury her, but they had put her exactly where she needed to be. She clutched the business card in her pocket and made a silent promise to Park Yoon-bi, to Han Mira, to all the women whose names she had found in those dusty files. She would find the evidence, and she would burn their machine to the ground. The academy banished her to night duty. That's where she found their secret spark. Jun Seo agreed to meet her at a small coffee shop near the Han River, a place with dim lighting and booths tucked away from curious eyes. He was younger than Seo Yeon expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and the kind of restless energy that came from years of chasing stories nobody wanted told. "So, you are the cadet who's been asking questions about my sister," he said before she even sat down. And his voice carried equal parts suspicion and interest. Yeon slid into the booth across from him and placed the documents she had copied from the archive on the table. Between them, "I found these in the records building," she said, "and they connect Deputy Director Beek to at least 7 cases of assault spanning 20 years. Including your sister." Jun Seo did not touch the papers, and instead he studied Seo Yeon's face like he was trying to read something written there. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You are just a cadet, and going against Beek will destroy your career before it even starts." "They already destroyed my career," Seo Yeon said, "and now I have nothing left to lose." She told him her story, and when she finished, something in his expression softened. "My sister was like you," he said quietly. She could not stay silent when she saw something wrong, even when silence would have saved her. He finally picked up the documents and flipped through them, and his hands trembled slightly as he read names and dates he clearly recognized. "I have been investigating Yoon-bi's death for 8 years," he said, "and I have hit walls at every turn. Sources who suddenly refused to talk, editors who killed my stories, anonymous threats telling me to let it go. But you did not stop." Seo Yeon said, "She was my sister," Jun Seo replied. And those 4 words held more weight than any explanation could. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Yoon-bi told me she had evidence that would bring down everyone involved. Not just Beek, but the officials who protected him and the system that enabled him for decades." Han Mira said your sister hid everything before she died. Seo Yeon said, "Do you know where?" Jun Seo shook his head, frustration evident on his face. "I searched her apartment, her storage unit, her office at the advocacy group where she volunteered. Nothing," he said. "I even tracked down her old roommates and friends, but nobody knew anything." Seo Yeon thought about the archive, about the boxes and files stacked in forgotten corners, about the way paperwork accumulated in places people stopped looking. "Your sister was a cadet before she withdrew," she said slowly. "Did she have access to the records building?" Jun Seo looked at her with confusion. "I do not know," he said. "Why?" "Because nobody goes there," Seo Yeon explained. "And if she wanted to hide something where Beek and his people would never find it, that building would be perfect." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph she had taken of an old requisition form, a request for personal storage space in the archive basement, signed by Park Yoon-bi 12 years ago. "This form was never processed," Seo Yeon said. "Which means if she put something in that basement, it might still be there." For a moment, Jun Seo did not move, and then he grabbed her hand across the table with sudden intensity. "Find it," he said. and his voice broke on the words, "Please, find it." That night, Seo Yeon entered the records building with her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The basement was a place she had avoided until now. A dark maze of collapsed shelving units and water-damaged boxes that smelled of rot and neglect. She moved slowly through the debris, her flashlight cutting weak circles in the darkness, checking every corner and alcove for something that did not belong. Hours passed with nothing but dust and disappointment, and she was beginning to think she had been wrong when her light caught something strange behind a shelf that had fallen against the wall, creating a small hidden space. There was a metal box covered in grime. Her hands shook as she pulled it out and wiped away years of dirt to reveal a small padlock keeping it sealed. She used a maintenance tool to break the lock, and when she lifted the lid, she stopped breathing. Inside were cassette tapes labeled with dates and initials, a journal filled with handwritten entries in small neat script, and a manila envelope stuffed with photographs. Seo Yeon opened the envelope and felt her stomach turn over. The photographs showed evidence she could not look at for more than a few seconds, images that proved beyond any doubt what Beak had done to his victims. The journal contained detailed accounts of each assault, written in the victim's own words, with dates and locations and names of witnesses who had been silenced, and the cassette tapes. When Seo Yeon later played them on an old recorder she found in the archive, contained recordings of Beak himself admitting to what he had done, laughing about how nobody would ever believe a cadet over a chief instructor. This was everything. This was proof that could destroy not just Beak, but everyone who had protected. And Seo Yeon sat on the dirty basement floor surrounded by decades of buried truth. And for a moment she let herself feel the enormity of what she had found. Park Yoon-bai had gathered this evidence knowing it might cost her everything. And it had. But she had also known that someday someone would find what she left behind. Seo Yeon wiped her eyes and carefully returned everything to the box. She needed to get this out of the building. Needed to make copies and send them somewhere safe. Needed to contact Junseo and figure out their next move. She climbed the basement stairs with the box clutched against her chest, already planning how she would smuggle it past the morning security check. But when she reached the main floor, she froze in the corner of the ceiling, almost hidden behind a beam. A small red light blinked steadily. A security camera, one she had never noticed before, pointed directly at the basement door. Seo Yeon's blood turned to ice as she realized what this meant. Someone had been watching the basement, watching for exactly what she had just found. And now they knew. She forced herself to walk calmly to her desk and hide the box in her bag, pretending she had noticed nothing. But her mind was racing. How long had the camera been there? Who was monitoring it? How much time did she have before they came for her? The morning guard arrived right on schedule, and Seo Yeon walked past him with a casual nod that cost her everything she had. Once she was outside, she started running. The academy banished her to night duty. That's where she found their secrets. The summons came at 7 in the morning, just 2 hours after Seo Yeon had hidden the evidence box in a locker at the train station. A first-year cadet delivered it to her dormitory room with wide, nervous eyes. And the message was simple. Deputy Director Beak requests your presence in his office immediately. Seo Yeon changed into a fresh uniform with hands that refused to stay steady, and she walked across campus feeling like everyone who passed her could see the guilt written on her face. Beak's office was on the top floor of the administrative building, a space designed to intimidate with its high ceilings and walls covered in awards and photographs of powerful men. He stood by the window when she entered, looking out at the training grounds below, and he did not turn around when he spoke. "Cadet Yoon," he said, and his voice was warm and friendly in a way that made her skin crawl. "Please, sit down." She sat in the chair facing his desk and waited, keeping her expression neutral. even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Beak finally turned to face her, and he smiled like they were old friends meeting for tea. "I wanted to check on you personally," he said, settling into his leather chair. "The records building can be such a lonely assignment, and I have heard you have been putting in extra hours there. I find the work interesting." Seo Yeon replied carefully. "There is a lot of history in those files." "Indeed there is," Beak agreed, and something flickered behind his eyes that made her go cold. "History that most people prefer to leave undisturbed." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, still smiling that terrible smile. "I understand your mother is a hard worker," he said casually. "She cleans the Hanwon Tower, yes. That building is owned by Director Shin, one of our board members, and he has always been very particular about who he employs." The threat was so smooth and polished that it almost sounded like concern. Seo Yen forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "My mother has worked there for 15 years, she said. "I am sure Director Shin has no complaints about her service." "Of course not," Beak said. "I only mention it because I want you to understand how connected everything is in this world. Careers, families, futures all tied together in ways we do not always see." He stood and walked around the desk, stopping beside her chair so close that she could smell his cologne. "You are a smart young woman," he said softly. "And smart women understand when to let sleeping dogs lie." Seo Yan looked straight ahead and said nothing. Beak placed a hand on her shoulder, and it took everything she had not to recoil from his touch. "Enjoy your remaining time at the academy, Cadet Yoon," he said. And then he returned to his window and dismissed her with a wave. She walked out of that office knowing she had hours at most before he made his move. The moment she was off campus, she called Jung Seo and told him everything. "You need to disappear," he said urgently. "Come to my apartment and we can figure out what to do next." But Seo Yin had already made her decision. "I am sending you copies of everything," she said. "Digital scans, photographs of the photographs, audio files from the tapes, all of it goes to your encrypted drive tonight." "And then what?" Jun Seo asked. "Then if anything happens to me, you release it all." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Seo Yin," Jun Seo said finally, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You do not have to do this alone." "I am not alone," she replied. "I have you, and I have the truth, and that is enough." She spent the afternoon at an internet cafe, scanning documents and uploading files while checking over her shoulder every few minutes. And by evening, she had created 3 separate backup copies stored in different locations. Then she went to see her mother. The older woman lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, and she looked confused when Seo Yeon appeared at her door on a weekday evening. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately, because mothers always knew. Seo Yeon hugged her for a long time before answering. "I may have done something that will cause trouble," she said, "and I need you to know that whatever happens, I did the right thing." Her mother held her face between work-roughened hands and studied her, with eyes that had seen decades of hardship. "My daughter," she said, "you have always been too honest for this world." They had dinner together, and Seo Yeon memorized every detail. The way her mother laughed, the smell of doenjang stew, the sound of the old clock ticking on the wall, because she did not know when she would see this place again. She was walking back to the train station when her phone rang. It was her mother, and she was crying. "2 men came to my work today," she said through sobs. "They asked questions about you, about where you go, who you talk to. And my supervisor called me into his office and said there are concerns about my employment status." Seo Yeon stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk as rage and fear battled inside her. "Mom, listen to me," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I need you to stay with Anhai Jin for a few days, just until this is over." "Seo Yeon, what is happening?" her mother begged. "I'm going to fix it," So Yuan promised. I am going to fix everything. She hung up and stood there in the cold night air, trembling not from the temperature, but from the weight of what she had to do. They had threatened her mother. And that changed everything. No more waiting. No more planning. She needed to end this now. She searched her phone for a name she had saved weeks ago. A prosecutor who had made headlines for bringing down corrupt officials. A woman with a reputation for being impossible to intimidate. Choi Yeon-hee answered on the third ring. Prosecutor Choi. My name is Yoon Seo-yeon, and I have evidence of a decades-long conspiracy of sexual assault and murder involving senior officials at the National Police Academy, she said in one breath. I need your help. There was a pause that felt like forever. Where are you now? Choi asked, and her voice was sharp and alert. Gangnam Station. There's a park 2 blocks east with a statue of Admiral Yi, Choi said. Meet me there at 5 tomorrow morning and bring everything you have. I will be there. Seo-yeon said. One more thing, Choi added, and her tone turned serious. The moment you hand me this evidence, your life will never be the same. There is no going back from what you are about to do. Seo-yeon thought about Park Yoon-bai dying on that cliff road, about Han Mira hiding for 20 years, about her mother crying on the phone, about all the women whose names have been erased from history. I know, she said. I am ready. The academy banished her to night duty. That's where she found their secrets. The park was empty and dark when Seo-yeon arrived, with only the bronze statue of Admiral Yi watching over the frozen grass. She had not slept, and she had not eaten, but none of that mattered now. Prosecutor Choi appeared at exactly 5 o'clock, walking briskly from the shadows with a briefcase in one hand and a phone in the other. She was smaller than Seo-yeon expected, barely reaching her shoulder, but there was something in the way she moved that radiated authority. Show me, Choi said without greeting. And Seo-yeon handed over the metal box. The prosecutor sat on a bench and examined each piece of evidence by the light of her phone, her expression growing more severe with every photograph and every recorded word. When she finished, she looked up at Seo-yeon with eyes that burned. How long have you been carrying this alone? She asked. A few weeks, Seo-yeon said. But the women in those files have been carrying it for decades. Choi nodded slowly and closed the box. You understand that once I open an investigation, everything becomes official, she said. Your name will be in reports. Lawyers will try to destroy your credibility, and Beek's allies will do everything in their power to make you regret this decision. I understand, Seo-yeon said. Good, Choi replied, and she stood with new energy. Then let us begin. What followed was the fastest and most brutal investigation Seo-yeon had ever witnessed. Within hours of receiving the evidence, Prosecutor Choi assembled a task force of investigators she personally trusted, and they moved with a speed that suggested years of frustrated preparation. Beek was brought in for questioning before noon, still wearing the confident smile he had shown Seo-yeon in his office by evening. That smile was gone. 3 other senior officials were suspended pending investigation, and the academy director was informed that his cooperation was expected immediately. The news broke on the second day, and it broke like a dam bursting. Jun Seo published his story with everything he had gathered over 8 years, combined with the evidence his sister had collected. And within hours, it was the only thing anyone in the country could talk about. The academy tried to control the damage, releasing statements that called Seo-yeon's evidence unverified and her motives questionable. They announced her immediate expulsion for theft of confidential documents, unauthorized access to restricted areas, and conduct unbecoming a cadet. For a brief moment, Seo-yeon wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, but then something happened that nobody expected. Han Mira came forward. She appeared at a press conference with Prosecutor Choi and told her story to a room full of cameras, her voice shaking but her words clear. and then another woman came forward. And another 6 survivors in total. Women who had been silent for years because they thought nobody would believe them. Now standing together because one young cadet had refused to let their stories stay buried. The recordings were played on every news channel, and there was no denying Beek's voice admitting to what he had done. His lawyer tried to claim the tapes were fabricated, but audio experts confirmed their authenticity, and 3 witnesses came forward to verify conversations they had overheard. Beek was arrested on the 5th day, led out of his home in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions. He refused to answer. 2 board members resigned within the week, and the academy director was charged with obstruction of justice for his role in suppressing complaints. The civil case that Park Yunbai had been preparing to testify in 8 years ago was reopened, and investigators began looking into her death with fresh eyes 1 month after Seo Yeon first handed over the evidence. The academy issued a formal apology to all victims and announced a complete restructuring of its complaint and oversight systems. Her expulsion was reversed with full honors, and she was offered immediate reinstatement with a personal apology from the interim director. Seo Yan sat in that meeting and listened to powerful people tell her how brave she was, how much they admired her courage, how she represented the best of what law enforcement could be. She thanked them politely and told them she needed time to consider her options. The truth was, she had already made her decision. The National Police Academy had been her dream once, but that dream belonged to a different version of herself, a version that still believed institutions could be trusted to do the right thing on their own. She applied for transfer to the regional academy in Jeonju, a small school far from the politics and power struggles of the capital, and she was accepted without hesitation. Her mother no longer worked as a cleaner, because the Victim Compensation Fund had provided enough for her to finally rest. They spent a week together before Seo Yeon left for Jeonju. Just the 2 of them in that small apartment, cooking meals and watching television, and not talking about the future. On her last night at the academy in Seoul, Seo Yeon was invited to speak to a class of first year cadets, young people with bright eyes and nervous energy who reminded her of herself not so long ago. She stood at the front of the lecture hall and looked at their faces, and for a moment she did not know what to say. Then she thought about Park Yunbai, who had gathered evidence knowing it might kill Hirsch. She thought about Han Mira, who had hidden for 20 years but found the courage to speak when it mattered most. She thought about her mother, who had worked her whole life to give her daughter a chance at something better. The system will try to silence you, Seo Yeon said finally. The powerful will try to erase you, and there will be moments when you wonder if the truth is worth the price you have to pay for it. She paused and looked at each young face in turn. But the truth has a way of surviving, she continued. It hides in forgotten files and dusty basements. It lives in the memories of people who refuse to forget. And sometimes it just needs someone stubborn enough to find it. A hand went up in the back row. Were you ever scared? A young woman asked. Seo Yeon smiled. Every single day, she admitted. But I was more scared of what would happen if I stayed silent. After the lecture, she walked across campus one last time, past the training grounds and the administrative building and the dining hall where she had eaten so many lonely meals. She ended her journey at the records building, standing in front of its gray walls as the sun set behind her. The building was being renovated now, its archives digitized and its secrets brought into the light. And soon there would be nothing left of the place that had changed. Her life. Seo Yeon placed her hand against the cold stone and closed her eyes. Thank you, Yunbai, she whispered. Thank you for waiting for me. Then she turned and walked away, toward a future she could not predict but no longer feared. She had found the secrets, and she had told the truth, and that was enough. That would always be enough.